So I think listeners just got their money's worth, because your insight that the reason we hesitate to ask questions is because they create tension.
Greetings, Ken Woodward here. It's a new year, and the perfect offset to the world burning is a palate-cleansing conversation with the one and only Seth Godin. That's spelled S-E-T-H, last name G-O-D-I-N. If you are unfamiliar with his work, I'm confident you will be a fan by the end of the episode. I was introduced to his work in 2007, and this podcast was created in the Podcast Fellowship, a podcast incubator he led in 2018. His fingerprints are all over much of the work I have shipped. We met during the This is Strategy book launch in November last year, and this is our first conversation about questions. Additionally, just some logistical and thank yous. I want to reiterate my gratitude for this curated questions community. New listeners find the podcast daily and integrate the lessons into their lives. A special shout out to all the people joining from Player.fm. While the United States leads in percentage, the community is global and all are welcome. I recognize that every download or subscriber taps or clicks expecting to receive value for the time spent. I understand this expectation and intend to deliver. I am confident this conversation with Seth will be time well spent. Albert Einstein said, "Don't think about why you question, simply don't stop questioning." Welcome to Curated Questions. I am your host, Ken Woodward. And these questions are not mathematical equations, but rather a resource to encounter personal reflection and growth. As Tupac Shakur stated, even the genius asks questions. Now, let's engage the questioning community. Seth Godin is a best-selling author of 22 books in 39 languages, entrepreneur, and speaker. Books include The Dip, Linchpin, Purple Cow, Tribes, This is Marketing, and most recently, This is Strategy. In April of 2025, he will upload his 10,000th daily blog post to one of the most popular blogs in the world. Yeah. That's like over 27 years of daily writing. Seth founded two companies, Squidoo and Yoyodyne. Yoyodyne was later acquired by Yahoo. He's credited as the inventor of email marketing. Not the spammy kind, the good kind. Seth has given 5 TED Talks, including 2 that rank as the most popular of all time. By teaching about everything from effective marketing and leadership to the spread of ideas and our responsibilities as leaders, Seth has motivated and inspired people worldwide. And now, he's here to talk about questions. Seth, welcome to Curated Questions. It is good to have you here.
Well, thank you for making this ruckus, for leading the way you do.
Absolutely. In preparation, I was reading through what does it sound like when you change your mind? And then in it, I found a copy of the 2016 Value Creation Masterclass. And in there, all of the chapters were questions, 33 questions. It's clear that questions have been a part of who you are. When did you first understand the power of questions?
I think that, like many kids with a short attention span, I grew up believing in the power of answers. I felt like my job in school was to answer questions, and if I was doing a really good job, to answer them before they were even asked. And I think that one of the things I discovered about trying to show up with answers is if there isn't intent and buy-in and permission, answers don't land very well. And questions might be a good way to help people open up to possibility. I think that the idea of questions for actual inquiry might be a little overstated. That often when we ask direct questions, we don't get the truth in response because people can clam up. Doctors understand this when they're trying to diagnose something. If they just ask the litany of questions, they're probably not going to get at the truth that other doctors haven't seen. It's more subtle than that.
What do you do to get under the layer or to be able to really get down to those lower levels? Does it just follow questions, mindset, worldview? How does that work for you?
When I was building the first generation of the internet, we could get a meeting with just about anybody because there were people whose job was head of new media and we were new media, so we could get in there. But turning that into a relationship that would lead to a sale where we could understand what their choices were, what their opportunities were, was not easy because everyone was performing. And what I found early on is that if I said to somebody a couple questions like, so how'd you get this job anyway? What are things like around here? What did your boss do before they were your boss? These sorts of questions that are not straight on. Everyone can answer the question, how'd you end up with this job? And they always start with, well, it's a funny story. And then they proceed to tell you a story that's not funny. And this way in to find people's narrative then led to more questions, which then led to, well, now we can understand what you're trying to accomplish. So let's talk with each other, not at each other, about how we could accomplish that together.
As we look to This Is Strategy, your latest book, you've got roughly 1,000 questions through here. In another interview, I heard you say that you really are not about the answers, but you're about the questions. Why are questions such a big part of This Is Strategy?
Well, my ego is big enough that I do think I have answers, but I believe that the only way in a format like a book to help people dig deep into something they've been ignoring is to give them questions instead. Because if they're enrolled in the journey, and I could ask you a question like, well, if you had to charge 10 times as much as you charge now, what would you do differently? Or if it had to be free, what would you do differently? These questions aren't rhetorical. There's an answer to them. The answer isn't the big answer. It's the step on the way to finding what you need. Asking who's it for and what's it for? What is the change we seek to make? These questions are prompts that open us up to dig deeper and get past the idea that tactics are all we need.
Okay. You also did a compendium strategy deck. It's a deck of 52 cards, 200 questions. So how did you choose what questions? I'm assuming you probably had 1,000 questions to go through and then you had to call those down. How did that work for you to develop this?
I'm a game designer at heart, and I don't find much pleasure in holding a deck that's nothing but a bunch of flashcards because there's no reason for it to be a deck. It should just be a book. In this case, what I did was I made it so that there's 5 million combinations, and it's the juxtaposition of questions that lead to a meta question. So you play 4 cards in different polarities, and you end up with 4 different questions that you will never see again in that combination. And what I was trying to do was not find the perfect questions. The book has more than 1,000 questions in it. But what I was trying to do was find questions that could juxtapose with one another. That one you put right next to it, a question like, how big is our circle of us? Meaning, how many people do I care about? Right next to a question like, is the change we're making contagious? Now, all of a sudden, the connection between those two questions leads to a whole other sort of inquiry that wouldn't happen if they hadn't been next to each other.
And has the result been, as folks have used them and such, have we been getting that result out of it?
I've been absolutely delighted. I'm an author and I work with a publisher. Authors don't make decks, publishers don't sell decks, but I love the craft of it. So I made it thinking, 100 of them would end up in the world. And we've gone back to press 4 times. And the feedback I'm getting from people is that this is a tool. And people used to look at books as tools, but now, because we live in such a short attention span world, books feel more like a text. And so the idea that I could create a tool again was thrilling to me.
As you mentioned, I know that you like games. Is there other ways to kind of gamify the use of questions? Because this podcast is all about questions, how they can be used in different ways. So any other thoughts on how questions might be gamified?
Well, so let's talk about what a game is. First of all, I write about this a lot in a book. A game is not a board game or even a card game. A game is any situation where there are more than one person involved and there's scarcity and there's an outcome. So a conversation is a game. And it is a game that works best if people are enrolled in the journey together. And what happens in a singles bar or on Tinder is a game, but what happens at a job interview is a game. And what happens when we talk to a cop on the street is a game. And the question is, how do we play games with other people where we're aware of what it would be for them to win and for us to win? Because if we can play games, infinite games, where the goal isn't to beat the other person, then magic can happen. And a conversation is an infinite game in the sense that we can both win if we play well. So what it is to play well in a conversation of any kind has to involve questions. It's not, I'm talking for a while, and then I pause and you talk for a while.
Mm-hmm.
It's, I riff and then I open a door for you and I find out what is it that you're challenged by? What is it that you want to share? What is it that you're afraid of? And by interrogation, not police interrogation, but interrogation of our sensibility and our condition, we can both play better.
So in that description of what is a game, really everything that we're touching on throughout our day, just throughout life, is a game by that definition. If I'm sitting down with my boss and talking over things that we need to do, there's a level of game to that by that definition.
And that's useful because we know how to play games. It's useful because game theory teaches us a lot. Because when we think about status and affiliation, those are things that are associated with games. And also, if we are in a game and we do something that doesn't work, it doesn't mean we're a bad person. It means we made a move that didn't work. And we can learn how to make that move better next time. So, can you think about a conversation you had in the last few weeks that went beautifully?
Yes. Yeah.
What about it was useful?
I guess it was, I'd say just the exchange of ideas, right? Hearing what she had to say and what that viewpoint was, I found to be helpful. I walked away from it as a result of that better. So it served me as well.
So a change happened. Because if there isn't a change, then why are we wasting our time? We're here interacting, creating tension, showing up, taking risks to make a change happen. And that's why the banality of cocktail parties doesn't work for me and why I hate going to them. Because no one's trying to exchange anything or change anything. And so I don't understand the point.
Yeah, often when I go to any kind of interaction like that, I generally will find myself off in the corner talking with one person, just so we can get to deeper conversation. There's more of an exchange, and it's less about just talking to 75 people for, 20 seconds or whatever. But yeah, getting the opportunity to really engage and to understand and to learn, I find far greater value in those kind of conversations.
And so that gets us back to systems, which is many people who are listening to this have authority, control, power, influence to change the setting. And if you want conversations to happen, then create the conditions where questions happen. Create the conditions where the game happens. And if you're running a conference, don't run it like a cocktail party. Run it in a way that tension is created on purpose, where questions follow and conversations ensue.
Can you define tension? You talk about it in the book, but can you define that?
So tension is not the same as stress. Stress is wanting two things at the same time that you can't have at the same time. Stress is wanting to eat a cookie and wanting to lose weight. You can't do both. Stress burns us out. Tension is pulling back on a rubber band and then letting it go. Tension is anticipation. It's scarcity that can be dealt with. So if Taylor Swift says concert tickets go on sale at 2:00, she creates tension just by that announcement, because you got to run to your parents and get them to get tickets for you before it sells out. If there was no tension, people would just say, I'll get around to it when I get around to it, because there's no scarcity. So the tension that we seek to create is a necessary component of change. You cannot have change without tension.
And using questions, I would say, is a great mechanism for creating the tension, in that, at least if you're purposeful about it, not just being a jerk, but to intentionally ask questions to get to a matter or to be able to create that tension, then it leaves it up in the air. Because to me, the assumption that we make is when we hear a question, that means I must answer it. So first there's some initial tension that I heard a question mark. You know, I learned in school, anytime a teacher asks me a question, there's a question mark. I start to sweat and I got to come up with an answer. All right.
Correct.
So I got to make that happen. So certainly just the use of questions can immediately bring tension. Jimmy Smith, that I had spoken with, he had talked about where you got to have friction, right? Friction is good because you can now have forward motion, right?
Correct.
Have propulsion. Exactly. So I look at tension as very similar that way, where you can use questions intentionally as a way to create that circumstance whereby change might be able to happen.
I think that's a fantastic insight. So I think listeners just got their money's worth, because your insight that the reason we hesitate to ask questions is because they create tension. The reason that it's easier to go to a cocktail party is because it doesn't create a certain kind of tension. And the tension that we seek, so think about the Supercuts haircutting chain. Now, they had a problem, which is when you go to a barber you've never been to before, there's this awkward conversation that goes on where the barber says to you, what kind of haircut do you want? And people bungle the answer because it's a very high stress moment that we don't have a lot of experience dealing with that question. Since that tension exists, we're likely to go back to the same barber over and over again, I'm told, because we don't want to deal with it. So what they said at Supercuts, back when I used to take my kids there, is, how long has it been since your last haircut? Everyone knows the answer to that question. And that question, the answer carries an enormous amount of data because we know how fast most hair grows. And so we can now make an assertion as to what you feel like when your haircut is cut the right length, because we go back in time. But that doesn't matter. What matters is I asked you what seems like an easy question. You answered what seems like an easy answer. And now a connection is made and I can ask you a follow-up question. And I never say, what do you want your haircut to look like? That's an essay question. That's too hard. But after a few questions, we've built up trust because I've created tension and I've relieved it. Created, relieved it until we get to where you wanted to go.
I love that question. Seemingly such a simple question, but to your point, it does it just makes it so much easier. My barber, when I went to a couple days ago, she is on travel, and so went to another woman that took care of me across the aisle, and we had exactly this conversation. So very fresh in my mind. So how might one think about intentionally creating that? I'm assuming that it was by experience. The Supercuts folks stumbled across the question or figured that out. How might one be intentional about that? What factors should someone think about as they seek to do good work or engage, but to be able to create using questions to create tension? What are factors to think about?
So when you say to a 13-year-old girl, how was school today? You are creating tension. You are exposing her to all sorts of feelings that she doesn't really want to have right now with an adult she's trying to separate herself from. And if you do that night after night after night, what you're actually doing is pursuing a strategy of separate lives because you are afraid and you now are living in fear with this teenager. You haven't created the conditions for a safe exploration of the tension toward forward motion. And the alternative is to figure out what's the project here? What is the change I seek to make? What is the kind of interaction I'm hoping for over time? And how do I ask a different sort of question that over time will be answered with how was school today, but it's not the question. And so one method that one could imagine tactically is saying to somebody, I had a really tough day at work today. The person 3 cubicles down didn't love the project I was working on. It really stressed me out. That doesn't sound like a question. But when you pause, you're creating tension because the other person, who is already old enough to understand the volley of conversation, has to say something. And the easiest thing for them to say is to share something that happened to them that reminds them of that. Right? Or when we think about what kind of project is going on in the mind of the person we're engaging with, and we know that they care a lot about getting on the math team, we can ask a question like, were there any easy questions on your math homework? Because answering that question is not a high tension thing, because either the answer is yes, and I'd love a little help, or yes, but I figured it out, or no, I'm really good at this. There was no problem whatsoever. But that kind of no is different than the no of, did anything good happen at school today? Because it gets back to, who am I talking to and what is the change I seek to make? What tension am I here to create? And all of it involves a sort of radical empathy. And it is not the empathy of kindness, which I'm in favor of. It is the empathy of humility, because we realize other people have a choice. They don't have to tell us their truth. They don't have to talk to us. They don't have to buy from us. They don't have to engage with us. We have to go to where they are because we cannot command that they come to where we are.
Okay.
And it's very difficult to imagine the fear, the status games, the affiliation challenges of a 13-year-old. But if you're not willing to even assert or imagine that, you have no hope of having the engagement you're seeking.
That's helpful, especially in the world of engaging with teenagers who, life for a teenager is not easy in today's world. It's brutal. Trying to help them through and to be able to connect is just difficult. What wrong questions continue to be asked, or what are the wrong questions that we often ask? I don't know if we riff on that or if it's just a clean sheet and go on to what's your thoughts?
Well, wrong might not be the best word. Ineffective might be a better word.
Okay.
It's ineffective to ask closed-end questions as if you were simply gathering data, right? Because data is, ever easier to acquire. So what temperature is it outside? Well, I just have to look at my watch and I know what temperature. That question isn't a good question in the spirit we're talking about. But mostly, I think what we're getting in trouble with when we don't think about our questions with intent is we don't have a strategy. And the strategy is, what is the change I seek to make? And, if you come to my house for dinner, the change I seek to make is to make you feel like you've been there many times before, like it is a comfortable, safe place. And then if I can accomplish that change, the change I seek to make is to challenge you to become more of the person you like being. Because when that happens, you will be glad you came. Not, we made it through and I needed food and now I have food. It's, when I'm there, I feel more like the me I want to be.
Yeah.
So to get to that, it helps to ask questions where the answer is helping that person be the person that they are when they're a hero to themselves.
Can you say that again? Help them to be the hero one more time?
So it says on the collectible chocolate bar that I made, it says, when the person you could have been meets the person you are becoming, is it going to be a cause for celebration or heartbreak? And so the person we are becoming is a victim of the system. The person we are becoming makes short-term, urgent choices, doing their best. But the person we hope to be, that hero of us that we hope to become, that person withstands the short-term urgencies, pushes back against the system, and does things that we hope we would do. And so I can't help somebody on their 30-year career journey. I can't help somebody unlock things in a relationship, but I can help them for an hour if I'm hanging out with them, narrate versions of themselves that feel good.
So to get to that point is just a series of questions. It's just, in a conversation, not interview style, right? Because that idea of getting to that desired future self or the hope-filled self, right? But lots of things going on in my brain on this one now, because I so appreciate the question and what it's seeking to accomplish. That's not necessarily the goal of this strategy or other work. That almost seems like, okay, is that kind of the mission of Seth Godin? I mean, that feels like it's at that level versus any particular book that you've written or anything like that.
Well, I mean, I'm not here to promote a book, but no,
Right.
This is exactly what this strategy is about. If you are going to take up oxygen and space and resources and time, please explain to me, what's the change you seek to make? And maybe you want to sell more widgets. Maybe you want to help 5 people who are feeling unsettled feel safe. Maybe you are trying to build an institution that can thrive without you. Maybe you're trying to get more people to listen to your podcast. These are all projects.
Yep.
And in every one of them, you're going to expend resources to engage with other human beings to cause a change to happen. And what's fascinating about your mission here is you're picking a very atomic, molecular moment in interactions between humans, which is, what are the questions we're going to ask each other? Well, if you have a lame, banal 15-minute conversation with someone that could have happened on an elevator, what a waste. We should do it with intent. And the intent is not, I'm going to show up with a list of questions. The intent is, by the time this conversation is done, X will be true. And so I might need 1 or 2 banal questions so I don't seem like a psychopath. So a friend and colleague built a nonprofit that was focused on food insecurity. So you're there to raise $100,000. You sit down at the table and small talk ensues because that's the way human beings assert safety. how do you then shift gears to there's 1 million hungry people in New York City, and I need you to give me $100,000 to help that, or they're going to be hungry tonight. It's challenging.
That is a big leap. Yeah.
But it actually isn't, because the question was, so what was life like at the dinner table when you were growing up?
Okay. And so
everyone I know has an answer to that question.
Yeah. Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And so then I can compare and contrast that to what life is like at the dinner table to a family that's on food stamps. And now we're actually talking about your mom. And so I didn't waste your time in this conversation, but I didn't come to this conversation to talk about me. I came to this conversation to offer you a chance to honor your privilege and opportunity and your parents and the change you seek to make by doing something you can't do without me, which is being able to tell yourself a story about the impact you made on people you're never going to meet. That's an opportunity for you. You're not doing me a favor. But I have to create the conditions where we can have that conversation.
I'm assuming you're familiar with the work of Priya Parker.
Of course.
And, okay. It's very much in line with that of what are we really trying to accomplish? And so she does this through hospitality and in various means. And it's that intentionality. In that case, what she's talking about is events or dinners. But to your point, we have the opportunity to bring that into the elevator and to make still a great time in that short interaction.
Yeah, I mean, Priya and I have spent time together, and she's brilliant. The interesting thing when we talk about elevators is one of the things they teach you at places like Techstars is your elevator pitch. How do you have this cogent 2-sentence explanation of what you do? And no one ever bought anything on an elevator. So you don't need an elevator pitch. What you need is an elevator question. An elevator question that causes the person to follow you off the elevator and find out more. And
I love that.
I worked at Yahoo at their peak. They had 183 links on the homepage. And this little company came along, and we had the chance to buy them for $15 million. And Google, their elevator pitch was super simple, which is Yahoo has a homepage that's designed to get you to stay on Yahoo. That everything that is built inside of Yahoo is how many clicks can we get per visit. What would happen if there was a web page that was designed to get you to leave? That's it. That's their whole strategy.
Which, for that time, was certainly, it was the opposite of
correct. That's why Yahoo didn't buy them.
Wow. Certainly a missed opportunity, because they seem to have done pretty well for themselves at this point.
Yeah, they have. But it's interesting because what were the questions that were being asked by people in authority at Yahoo in 1999? And there were only 3. 1, how did the stock do today? 2, is anything broken? 3, what can you do today that will make the stock go up tomorrow? And those 3 questions described their strategy, and that's why they went away.
So in the world of strategy, the questions in that scenario, in a post-mortem, if you will, Yahoo, anybody involved, can come back and go, these are the questions that we were asking at the time that led us to this decision. Good, bad, or indifferent, this was the decision that we ended up with, and this is why we got there. So the importance of the questions that we're asking ourselves that's driving our strategy, if we can get to that, then that's going to inform all this other stuff, all the other, to your point, the tactics and such that happen elsewhere.
Correct. So what are things like around here? The fact is that culture defeats strategy, and culture is nothing but systems. And your strategy can build a system. So what we're seeking to do is make it so that people ask questions like, what are risks worth taking? What are we doing that might not work, but that supports our mission? What was the last thing you did that didn't work, and what did we learn from it? What have we done to so delight our core customers that they're telling other people?
Mm-hmm.
These are questions that clearly are from a different strategy than Yahoo 1999 strategy.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so when Satya Nadella showed up at Microsoft, he had to undo 10 years of toxic Steve Ballmer nonsense, which was all about asking the wrong questions. And he asked different, harder, bigger, longer term questions. And that's why Microsoft resurrected, because they figured out that they wanted to do hard things that would change the system as opposed to manipulating short-term things to make the stock go up.
Gotcha. Okay. That's helpful. I know that you finished up the Carbon Almanac, and as I look at your thank yous in your various books, you have a very, very diverse and international circle of people that are in your life. How has that informed your life of questions? Just that international insight.
The people I know, and I probably know people in 90 countries, the fact that they live in other countries doesn't seem to change very much.
Mm.
I think what changes for me is coming back again and again to looking for fear, affiliation, status, culture. What do I believe that other people don't believe? What do I see that other people don't see? What do I take for granted that other people don't take for granted? And working with acumen in Kenya or a little village in India, or hearing about what someone who's working so hard in Ukraine has to go through. It has been such a gift to me to be able to find empathy for people, some of whom have more than me. I mean, I feel bad for the billionaires I know. They're not happier than you and me. In almost every situation, they're less happy.
Mm.
But to develop empathy for why that would be, that's a really useful tool. The same way, sitting in a village with a guy whose entire belongings fit into a rollerboard suitcase. And he had so much wisdom in him and so much confidence and humility in equal measure that I think about him all the time.
Mm.
And so we can invite those people into our lives without them knowing we've invited them in. What would blank do? What would Bob do? What would Jill do? What would Susan do? Asking ourselves that question helps explain why people do things that feel inexplicable, that everyone is doing what they think is best at all times.
Mm-hmm.
So what happened to them? What system are they in that made them decide that that was the right thing to do? And then how do we change the system? And there's so many tragedies, so much trauma all around us, whether it's people losing their homes from a wildfire that we could avoid if we did something about the climate, to mass incarceration and how people should not be spending their entire life with no hope.
Yeah.
And we can do things on the edge. We can help one family, one person. But I think our real work is to ask questions about systems and then find a strategy to change them.
Wonderful. Now, this next one comes from your friend, Jerry Colonna. And the reason I reached out to him is I was reading Unleashing the Idea Virus from 2000 and stumbled across your dedication to him. And so I'm like, okay, hold on just a second. I didn't realize that you guys had been that long-term of friends. So reached out to Jerry, who had been previously on the podcast, and asked him what question I might ask about questions. But the one that he came back also captured so much of my appreciation for who you are. So Jerry's question, which I very much am in line with, is, Seth, how, given the state of the world, do you manage to continue to care as much as you do.
Isn't that a little like, do you walk to school or take your lunch? Like, I don't think those are related. I think if you all can only care if things are going well, then what does that mean about caring? I'm going to care no matter what. The state of the world is a really interesting question because the world as presented to us through our screens, mass mediafied and amplified and catastrophized, feels horrible, unspeakably horrible. I was born in between the Berlin blockade and the Cuban Missile Crisis. And the world was far closer to a cataclysmic crisis ending then than now. Also, systemically, for the last 50 years, we've known that we're melting the world we live in, and yet we persist. So should I have spent the last 50 years just curled up in a ball? You know, the thing is, we get to decide what breaking news is. I'm fairly aware of what happened in the world yesterday, but I'm not day trading. I'm sitting here trying to say, how do we teach a generation? How do we go to the foundation, not the bottom, but the foundation, and create community action? Individuals connecting with other individuals to ask each other hard questions with intent to make things better. And if I didn't care, then I would just take a nap. And you can't take a nap all day. So it's better to try.
Beautiful. Seth, thank you for trying. And I would argue succeeding. I have benefited so much from your work over the years. Thank you for being here, talking about questions and engaging in this world. Just so grateful for the light that you bring into the world. Thank you, sir.
Well, back at you. Showing up regularly, doing this work you're doing. It's not often thanked, but I'm thanking you. I appreciate it.
Thank you, sir. To those on the other side of the speakers, thank you for being here. Seth was true to form and provided a treasure trove of valuable nuggets to scoop up and consider how they apply to our lives. This is the kind of episode that is worthy of a second listen very slowly to ensure you captured everything that will serve you. Seth's foundational question, what is the change you are seeking to make, is one I am first going to tackle as I continue to develop my various strategies. All the questions and resources mentioned are in the show notes at curatedquestions.com for further reflection and study. I highly recommend visiting sethgodin.com for more insight into Seth's other projects. His recent appearance on the Tim Ferriss podcast, episode number 792, is excellent. Remember to be a light to yourself and those around you. Gratitude shout out to Beauty Pill for the show's music and producer Ben Ford for the technical help. This episode was recorded on Piscataway land. Please engage with this episode in some manner. Download, follow, save, like, share, or comment about something that resonated or something that you're going to apply. This action ensures we are engaging the questioning community. Until next time, keep questioning.